It is that time of year again. Ryan and I, we're going to be discussing our top 50 coasters. We did this video last year and we had a ton of fun on it. It's safe to say our top 50s, they've changed a little bit this year. So we're going to be updating our lists kind of. Before we get into how our lists have changed, let's first go over the coasters that were in our top 50s last year but have since fallen out, because with every new coaster that breaks into someone's top 50, one has to fall out. The coasters that were in my top 50 last year but have since fallen out were as follows: Goliath at Six Flags Great America, Aries Alpine Coaster at Aries Resort and Winery, the Smoky Mountain Alpine Coaster at Smoky Mountain Alpine Park, Steel Force at Dorney Park, Racer at Kennywood, Thunderhead at Dollywood, Phoenix at Knoebels, Raven at Holiday World, and El Toro at Six Flags Great Adventure. Ryan?
Kraken at SeaWorld Orlando, Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure at Islands of Adventure, Ride of Steel at Darien Lake, Thunderbird at Holiday World, Millennium Force at Cedar Point, Magnum XL 200 at Cedar Point, and the big one, the Incredible Hulk Coaster.
I forgot to say this before Ryan and I started getting into our list, but make sure you guys watch to the end so you can see all the coasters that make up the first half of Ryan and I's top 50. In case you guys never saw the first version of this that we did, we're going to discuss our coaster preferences. For me, airtime is not my top priority like it is for everyone else, although I do enjoy airtime, but it's not the end-all be-all of coasters for me. Rather than airtime, I personally prefer launches, intensity, and speed more, but if a coaster has a lot of airtime and people talk about it, then that's what I expect from a coaster, but we'll get more into that later. And Ryan, what do you prefer most on a coaster?
Well, lots of airtime, strong airtime, keeps its pacing well, and has good sequencing of elements. Credit count?
I'm pretty sure it's 314 last I checked.
I have 314 as well.
No shot.
Yes, we both have 314.
The coaster that put me at 314 happens to be my number 50, the Runaway Mountain Coaster at, well, the Runaway Mountain Coaster. This was the first time I've ever ridden an alpine coaster at night, and it had a lot of good things going for it. The setting out in the woods is great, really long. It combined the two aspects I liked most about my two alpine coasters that were on my top 50 last year. It had the airtime of Aries Alpine Coaster, and I felt like it had the length of Smoky Mountain Alpine Coaster. I would say if you're doing a trip to Silver Dollar City, make sure you get on this thing while in the area.
My number 50 is Prowler at Worlds of Fun. I've heard a lot of people rave about this thing. Don't get me wrong, I really liked it. Got 9 rides on it. It had some good airtime, but it also had pacing issues when I was there. Other than that, it was a pretty good GCI, but it's not my top one.
My number 49 is Racer at Kings Island. Every year, this coaster finds itself inside my top 50. Last year, I thought it was in danger of falling out because I didn't enjoy it quite as much as in recent years because the racing wasn't as fun for me, although that might have been because I rode Racer at Kennywood about a month prior, which took the racing element to a better level than Racer at Kings Island did. But the one thing that stood out to me this year was how good the airtime was, which, Ryan, I think you can agree with me on this. The airtime on Racer was, like, insane this year.
That was crazy.
Especially on the red side, like, there was one ride where I got a 2-click ride. The first feels I was flying way out of my seat, and it actually left me kind of shocked with how good it was. And I know this is gonna be unpopular, but I think it is the second best wooden coaster at Kings Island.
My number 49 is Banshee at Kings Island. Banshee used to be like a mid-tier invert for me, and I hadn't ridden it since 2021. Got some re-rides this year, and it was running much better, much smoother, more intense. I got a lot of hang time on that Heartline roll at the end, and that helix at the end was very forceful. Not to mention we got stuck on the brake run for about 10 minutes. The vests were not good after being pinned there for 10 minutes. I much prefer the old school restraints to the new ones.
My number 48 is Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure at Islands of Adventure. This coaster was one of the first 10 out of my top 50 last year. It managed to find its way back in this year after an awesome front row bike ride, which almost didn't go as planned because I made a wrong turn when trying to get to Hagrid first thing, and I almost didn't get it because someone had overtaken me. But huge thanks to the rides for allowing me to do this. They allowed me to wait an extra train because there was literally no one else behind me, and so I got the second train of the day, front row bike. All that aside, driving the motorcycle, that was a blast, like riding through the Forbidden Forest. Drop track didn't really bother me this time. Last launch is great. Great theming, great backward section, onboard audio, which I'm a huge fan of onboard audio. Hagrid is a solid ride, although I will say I feel like a lot of people overrate it in the Universal Coaster lineup. A lot of people say it's number 2 or 3, but for me, I think it is the 5th best coaster at that resort.
My number 48 is Goliath at Six Flags Great America. Haven't ridden it in 5.5 years, so it's the oldest and most unupdated coaster on my list. It was very good. It's my least favorite RMC though. One airtime hill that was incredible. The dive loop had a lot of hang time, and the hop into the brakes was really good. Not to mention the topper track Woody feel is unhinged. Makes it a lot better in my opinion.
From one short RMC to another one, my number 47 is Twisted Cyclone at Six Flags Over Georgia. For 3 out of the past 4 years, I found myself riding this underrated RMC hybrid, and this year it was on trial for me because 2023 I was there, Goliath wasn't open, and a lot of people consider that to be the best ride in the park. After getting re-rides on both of those this year, I can confidently say Twisted Cyclone is way better than Goliath. So much power on every single element, and there are no dead spots on that ride. The first drop is awesome. Reverse cobra roll is super unique. Great wave turn. The last big drop before the last inversion, that is the best element on the ride, and then it's a rapid fire succession of a couple bunny hills at the end. While it's short, Twisted Cyclone is an awesome ride, and I feel like it deserves more attention.
My 47 is Kumba at Busch Gardens Tampa. I thought it would get bumped out of my top 50 this year, but it ran really fast, pretty smooth. I got to ride it 3 different times, and I'm happy because I only had one day at that park this year with 8 hours on a Saturday, so I was scrambling for time the entire time I was there. It's really forceful, has some good whip to it, and I like the tunnel at the end.
My number 46 is a coaster that I bet at least 50% of you watching this will have this as your number 1. Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point. I know what you're thinking. Why do you have this ranked so low? I've never gotten a trimless ride on it. I was unlucky enough to have gotten 5 extremely harsh trimmed rides on this when I went in July of 2021. It made the second half void of basically any airtime till the finale, and when it runs like that, I can't justify ranking it higher for me. This is, I would say, the RMC I desperately need to re-ride the most. The first half is really good, and it's what puts this coaster in my top 50. The first drop in the back row and the first 0G roll up front are both elite. The double down after the 0G stall, as well as the 0G stall itself, as well as the double up into the mid-course, those are all good. The giant Outer Banks Sally didn't do anything for me, but the top hat was decent, and then the bunny hill finale at the end was also a lot of fun. It hurts to have never gotten a trimless ride, especially since they are rarely trims. Hopefully I can get out there and get some redemption rides next year, although no guarantees about that.
46 is a ride that's been closed all year. Steel Curtain at Kennywood. It really surprised me at how fluid it was. Very fluid. All of the elements were unique. The airtime was surprisingly good. It got 1 back row ride, I think 2 hours after the park opened. It had a lot more whip to it than I thought it would. It was very long. I just wish it could be more reliable because it's just a lift hill coaster. I mean, it should be pretty reliable, but something got messed up with the train or something.
Number 45 is a coaster that I thought for sure would be my top 25, maybe even top 10 by the looks of it. Boardwalk Bullet at Kima Boardwalk. Ever since this Gravity Group underwent its extensive refurbishment, I heard a lot of people saying it was the best ride in Texas. I had very high expectations for it. Unfortunately, the second half had pacing issues, which I did not expect. From what I heard from other enthusiasts, I was expecting a non-stop, relentless ride from start to finish. Boardwalk Bullet sadly wasn't that ride for me. I will say that each of my 5 rides came in practically empty trains, so I'm pretty sure that had something to do with it, but I did ride it later in the day, so I really don't know what happened there, but I'm convinced it was empty trains. The first half was elite, but the second half, it died. Not my favorite wooden coaster in the state of Texas, believe it or not. We'll get to that in a minute.
My number 45 is Candymonium at Hershey Park. I had 1.5 days here. One of them was raining the entire day in 2021, but I got to ride everything I wanted to. Sadly, I only got 1 back row ride on Candymonium when the park first opened. It was still very good, very smooth B&M Hyper. I would say it's more of a mid-tier B&M Hyper. Solid airtime. The outward bank coming out of the helix could have been stronger, and the trim brake kind of killed the last momentum of the ride, but smooth, good floater, and a long ride.
Number 44 is Steel Eel at SeaWorld San Antonio. I first rode this Morgan Mini Hyper in July of 2019, and it was a lot better than I thought it was going to be. I was expecting it to be a ride like Magnum XL200, which I thought had really painful airtime. Steel Eel surprisingly didn't really have any painful airtime, so I thoroughly enjoyed it. But the reason why it ranks over Steel Force, despite being half the size, is because of the second half. Steel Force, the second half was kind of for me because the mid-course brake run hit hard, and while Steel Eel also did have a mid-course, it dove down off the mid-course and it took those last few hills with more speed, providing better airtime. I never rode this coaster in the back row. I've only ridden it in the front, but I've heard the back is extremely painful. I was almost going to try it this year, but I decided to spare myself the more painful ride. Maybe I'll have to give it a try next time I go back there, but while it is a really solid ride, I would not say it is the best ride in that park.
My number 44 is Powder Keg at Silver Dollar City. This was the first big roller coaster I went on. I remember when I was like 8 or 9, I went on this with my grandpa. That's the only memory I've got of riding a roller coaster with my grandpa. So it has a special place in my heart. Aside from that, very good ride. One of the best launches, even though it's not that fast. Loads of airtime similar to B&M Hyper airtime with some kinks of laterals in there. The Buzzsaw Fall section is full out speed and laterals, and you cannot tell me that those laterals should be safe. Those laterals are ridiculous. You're like pinned to the side of your seat for the entire turn, and then you go up a small lift hill, pretty decent sized drop, and then my favorite part of the ride, which is that little ejector pop right into the helix to the end of the ride. It's smooth. The only thing I would gripe about were the restraints, but even then I don't really have that much of a problem with them.
Funnily enough, because my number 43 is Powder Keg. Ryan just said how the Buzzsaw Falls turn has really good laterals. Do not ragdoll on this element. I did that at the end of August. Terrible idea. Like, the sides of the seats were digging into my waist the whole time, time, and it was bad. If you ragdoll on that buzzsaw fall section, you're crazy. Despite that, the sense of speed in the buzzsaw fall section is good. Really powerful launch, although it's not the best air compressed launch I've experienced. We got some fog rides this year where like it was completely submerged in the fog, and it was crazy to not see the layout in front of you, and like you're just encased in all white all around you. It was very weird. I wish Powder Keg would stay open more often because it is not exactly a reliable coaster.
My number 43 is Nitro at Six Flags Great Adventure, the tallest coaster at Six Flags Great Adventure now. I thought it was going to be like a typical B&M Hyper, but it surprised me. First half was just how I expected. The second half, though, the mid-course didn't break at all, and then it just started tossing me like a rag doll on the final 5 hills, and it was borderline ejector airtime, which is kind of crazy. B&M Hypers aren't supposed to be that powerful, but when you get certain circumstances, they can be crazy rides.
My number 42 is a guilty pleasure for me, Mystery Mine at Dollywood. I sadly didn't get to ride this amazing Gerstlauer earlier this year, but I got 10 rides on it last year, which, given how a lot of people don't like that coaster, I bet they would say that was enough for a lifetime. It's just so wacky. I mean, the first half, yeah, it's not anything great, but the jankiness, I think it made the ride feel more chaotic and more fun for me, at least. Although the second half is elite. Everything from the cage canary falling over to the climactic sequence going up the second lift hill to the fire effect at the top to the beyond vertical twisted drop, which is the best drop at Dollywood, and then the elite double inversion finale. I couldn't get enough of this thing, and I know a lot of people don't like it. I think it's underrated, and I would even say the best coaster in all of Timber Canyon. Also, be sure to pay Buzz a visit. He's a pretty silly guy, although he might say some questionable stuff though, so you've been warned.
My number 42 is Mystic Timbers at Kings Island. This coaster ran really good in 2019 for me, then it was okay in 2021. Then we got some re-rides in August this year, and boy did it knock my socks off. Scary airtime is the best way to describe it. Everything about Mystic Timbers was good. It was smooth, good forces. It wasn't very good on laterals though. That's like the only gripe I have about it, but other than that, it's just a very fun coaster.
Number 41 is Montu at Busch Gardens Tampa. The only B&M invert on my top 50. This thing shot up my list this year. I first rode it in 2021 and I thought it was really good, but my rides in 2022 weren't quite as good, so I had to drop it. Then the thing had to run like a train, like Ryan said in the past about Patriot at Worlds of Fun, and it shot up my list. The best element on the ride might actually be the corkscrew at the end. That was the most surprising part of the ride for me this year. The zero-G roll was really good as well. The Batwing is a lot of fun. I would say definitely the best B&M looper in Tampa, although not many people I feel like would agree with me on that. I think it might actually be a little bit overshadowed when it comes to coasters in Florida these days, just because so many new coasters have opened since then, and a lot of people are talking more about those than Montu, but I think it's still an amazing ride regardless.
My 41 is Montu at Busch Gardens Tampa.
We did not just have the same coaster twice in a row.
This coaster was, I think, outside of my top 100 before this year. It basically crawled through all the elements last time I was there. This time, it ran so much better. It was actually forceful this time. Drops good with the whip coming out of it. G roll is probably my favorite thing in the first half. Batwing was a lot better than before. It gave me no force whatsoever the first time, and now there was a lot of whip to it. Second half was very good. Had a good corkscrew, and I also like the theming and the trenches.
Number 40 is what some people consider to be the best B&M Hyper, Diamondback at Kings Island. This coaster was on the rougher side last year, but this year I got 7 rides on it. I have no complaints with how it was running. Whether you're in the front, back, or even in row 8, which you gotta try row 8 if you want really sustained airtime. All 3 of those rows on Diamondback are elite, although I will stand by the statement that the back row is still the best row, mainly because you get soaked by the splashdown. I mean, depending on which side of the train you're on, you can reach your arm out and get soaked, and it only works in the very back, not the second back. I rode second back row once this year. It was kind of bad by comparison just because I wasn't able to get soaked by the splashdown. A lot of good floater airtime, and if you're wanting airtime at Kings Island, especially in the area of Rivertown, Diamondback is your ride, not that overrated wooden coaster next door. And I'm not talking about one that will be in part 2, so stay tuned for that.
My number 40 is Alpengeist at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. Montu gave it a run for its money this year, but I still prefer Alpengeist slightly. The reason why is because of that Cobra roll. One of the whippiest, most aggressive elements I think I've ever experienced. Even though it's over 100 feet tall, it has so much speed in the first half. Then it dials stuff back so you can catch your breath in the second half, but I still like it because I got some hang time. Somehow, in my 28 rides, the helix at the end was very forceful as well.
Number 39 was my 300th coaster, Texas Stingray at SeaWorld San Antonio. This GCI was one that I initially wasn't too hyped for, and I was actually a lot more excited to ride Boardwalk Bullet. But after that coaster disappointed me, I thought Texas Stingray was a better ride. This thing has a lot of good airtime, great pacing, a lot of good twisted hills, which isn't something I'm really used to with the GCI. I thought it was really good, and I would say it's the best coaster that San Antonio has to offer.
My number 39 is Jersey Devil at Six Flags Great Adventure. I think it's half a ride, if I'm being honest. The first half is amazing, and then the second half falls off completely. I rode the this thing 5 times. And the last ride I had, it was overspeeding in the first half and it slammed to a stop on the mid-course. Took us 2 minutes before it dropped us off the mid-course. And as you can expect, the second half did absolutely nothing and we barely made it over every hill. The first half is where this coaster really shines, and that's why it's so high on my list.
Number 38 is Prowler at Worlds of Fun. Texas Stingray took a swing at the spot for my top GCI, but it ultimately missed. Prowler is just a little bit better, although I think it's mainly because of the night ride on it. Prowler's night ride is really good, and I was not able to get a night ride on Texas Stingray, but maybe if I got the night ride on that, my opinion would have changed, but I don't know. Prowler is a lot of fun. Really good airtime, unlike a certain other GCI that's often compared to it. Laterals are on point. I've never really found pacing issues with it, although I've only ridden it on hot summer days and during haunts, so I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but I would say it's an underrated wind coaster, and I feel like one that a lot more people should get out there to ride because it's really good, and I wouldn't blame anyone for having this as their favorite coaster at Worlds of Fun.
My number 38 is Monster at Adventureland. Took a trip to Iowa this year, and I'm very happy I did because I got to ride this behemoth of a Gerstlauer. Doesn't really come close to any other Gerstlauers. This thing by far and away beats them. It has one of the best first drops of any coaster I've been on because of how violent the airtime is. This coaster's not really about airtime. It has a couple moments. The hang time is where this thing really shines, and if you're not a fan of hang time, you might not like this coaster. There's a trim brake at the end of the ride that is actually beneficial, which you don't hear that very often, but it slows down the train so you get a lot of hang time through it. My favorite element of this is the finish loop because it's just an elongated loop and there's just so much hang time on it. Very, very smooth, very comfortable trains, and you cannot go wrong with the Gerstlauer Infinity with those type of trains.
My number 37 is Titan at Six Flags Over Texas. One of the most underrated hypercoasters out there. This thing is a must ride if you love bone-crushing intensity like I do. At first, I thought it was good, but I really didn't think much of it, but then my 2 rides earlier this year were absolutely incredible. One of the greatest sense of speeds out there, a ridiculous helix, although it's not quite my favorite helix. Actually, there's 2 of them for that matter. I completely forgot about the second one. I was mainly talking about the first one. That first helix, no matter what, you will gray out, or maybe even in the case of my brother, blackout. I didn't have that, but still, Titan, I really enjoy this coaster, and believe it or not, it's my second favorite coaster at Six Flags Over Texas.
37, Thunderhead at Dollywood. My favorite GCI, and I don't know if another one can beat it. Last time I rode this was January 1st, 2021. A certain other coaster in the park was closed, so this is definitely my favorite coaster at Dollywood. This thing was running on steroids when I was there. It was running very, very fast. Pretty much every hill was ejector airtime. The laterals were very good. It was very smooth. I also got some rain rides on it, and it powered through the whole layout, and I got to ride it 9 times, and none of those were bad rides.
Number 36 is the Legend at Holiday World. Titan does have a good helix, but Legend still has a much better helix in my opinion. If you want crazy laterals, this is like the best element you'll ever find for that. You're stuck pinned to the side of the train no matter what, and it's kind of insane. I remember riding it with Ellis in the front row. He and I were both scared for our lives in the helix because of how ridiculous the laterals were. And I got 2 more rides earlier this year. It was just as good as ever. Really good pacing, especially towards the end. Even some good airtime moments in there, which I was not really used to on that ride. Like if I want airtime at Holiday World, I'm going to Voyage. But Legend, it's really good. Great night ride, relentless. Overall, another quality wooden coaster for that matter.
Yeah, very much.
This is not the last time we're talking about Legend. And why is that?
Legend is also my number 36. This thing is jumping up my list because I didn't think much of it the first time I rode it. Then I loved it and loved it even more and loved it even more. Everything about this coaster is good. The lateral is probably the best lateral centric coaster I've ever been on. That helix is so good. With the bone crushing laterals coming out of it, you get airtime. And the airtime on this thing is crazy. The ending portion of this and the speed hill is crazy, and you get some good floater coming off the big hill right into that tunnel. Relentless coaster, pretty darn smooth because the maintenance team at Holiday World is very good at preserving their woodies, and I am very happy about that.
Number 35 is Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket in Universal Studios Florida. I keep hearing this coaster's on borrowed time and it's very likely to close soon. And if that's the case, I'm actually going to be pretty upset about it because it has a lot of good forces, especially airtime. I would dare say some of the most underrated ejector airtime on the planet. Not to mention it has really good intensity on the treble clef at the far end of the ride, and also in that weird turn before the last block zone, like right as you're heading from Islands of Adventure to Universal Studios Florida. I love a good onboard soundtrack. This coaster, at least in terms of the secret song list, has a lot of good song options. This was my favorite coaster at Universal Studios Florida until this year, but then I rode a certain other coaster that you guys probably know what it is by now, but we'll get to that later. I would say it's a really solid ride, and I hope it doesn't close. We recorded our top 50 at the end of 2024, and since then Universal has announced that Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket will close in September. If it's still open when you're watching this and you want to get your last rides in, you have until September to do so.
My number 35 is Mamba Mamba at Worlds of Fun. Was not expecting the greatest things after riding Steel Force at Dorney Park. I rode that one first. The first half was better than Steel Force. It had more forces to it. The first airtime hill actually did something. The drop gave us a little pop of airtime as well. The helix was very forceful, and that little jolt before the mid-course was pretty fun. Then the second half just tossing you out of your seat. Basically like Magnum, but more sustained. I slightly prefer Mamba's finale over Magnum's, which is maybe unpopular, but Mamba has a very good finale, and that's why it ranks so high.
Number 34 is Cheetah Hunt at Busch Gardens, Tampa. If you want pure fun, it doesn't get much better than this one. Although I will say, the restraints did cause a bit of discomfort on my rides this year, but it wasn't that bad. Also, while we're on the topic of coasters not feeling compared to what you last felt, Rip Ride Rocket, I forgot to mention, was the opposite. That was a lot smoother than I remembered it being this year. Back to Cheetah Hunt. 3 great LSM launches, the second one being my favorite. Great sense of speed, run into the savannah like a cheetah, good heartline roll. A lot of people say this is a family coaster. I would not call it a family coaster because the inversion...
That's the only reason why I wouldn't call it a family
Exactly,
coaster.
yeah. Like, any coaster that goes upside down in my book is automatically not a family coaster. And I would also say that Hagrid is not a family coaster because I think the drop track would be a little bit too intimidating for some, but it's still more of a family coaster than Cheetah Hunt is. But I would also argue best night ride in Florida because it's pitch black for a lot of the ride, especially if you get a fireworks ride. Like, if that happens to you, it doesn't get much more fun than that.
My number 34 is Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind at Epcot.
For those of you who are going to be riding this soon and you don't want to know anything about what this ride does, jump to the time shown on your screen now because we will be going into what this ride does. I already know what it does, but in case you want to avoid spoilers, go ahead and jump to the time on your screen now.
First thing to know about this is that the track is massive. It's about the same size as a dive coaster. 5-car trains, you turn out of the station and you go up a lift hill and the team's talking about how this guy's stolen this generator, the Celestial. I'm a giant fan of Guardians of the Galaxy, so this was like my type of ride. So then you go up the lift hill and then you hear the Guardians theme song blasting. Then you turn backwards and then you look at the Celestial and a big explosion happens. And then you launch backwards 60 miles an hour, lightning flashes and everything, and your song starts playing. I rode this thing 3 times and got the same song all 3 times, which is ridiculous. Flock of Seagulls, I ran. So you blast off 60 miles an hour, you're going through the building, they're fighting the Celestial in the background while you're going through elements, going through planets. Then you come to a launched lift hill, basically, and you go up that about 15 or 16 miles an hour, something like that. Then you go down a helix and your vehicle's facing right at the moon, and you pick up some good speed down here. Then you like go through the longest brake run ever at a lot of speed, and then you finally slow down, and then they say, congratulations, you are now one of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Then you pull back into the station. One of the longest ride experiences I've ever had on a coaster. I would say it's similar in length to Hagrid, which is crazy because Hagrid is super long. This is a guilty pleasure, and I had so much fun with it.
Number 33 is Millennium Force at Cedar Point. The original Giga Coaster seems to have a mixed reputation among coaster enthusiasts, with some loving it and others hating it. I'm definitely one that loves it, as the sense of speed is one of the best, if not the best of any coaster. It feels like you're running all over Cedar Point like Sonic the Hedgehog, as his nickname is the Blue Blur. I'd say that's an accurate description of Millennium Force, because its track color is also blue. Great sense of speed, decent airtime as well, but you ride Millennium Force for the speed, whereas if you want more airtime at Cedar Point, I would say you got better options like Steel Vengeance and Magnum, or even maybe Gemini to that extent. Millennium Force, I can see why a lot of people don't care for it, but at the same time, it's hard for me to not have fun with it. And next time I go to Cedar Point, I am definitely getting multiple rides on it, because I only got 2 when I was last there in 2021, and I only got, I think, 3 in 2016 or something like that. But yeah, I could use some more rides on the original Giga Coaster.
My number 33 is Shivering Timbers. Now, I mentioned Goliath was the one I hadn't ridden in the longest time. It's actually Shivering Timbers. Michigan Adventure was the 4th park on the trip. Great America was the last park on the trip. Shivering Timbers is a monster woody. I think it's like 5,300 feet long, which is ridiculous, and it's only 120 feet tall or something like that. This thing isn't the smoothest, but it's not the roughest either. One of CCI's best layouts. It's just a hyper coaster, but a woody. Every single hill hits. The last turn has some good laterals as well, that helix at the end. I really want to go back and ride this thing because airtime's my thing, and this coaster is pretty much all airtime.
Number 32 is Max Force at Six Flags Great America. Illinois' best coaster can be summed up as short but sweet. I mentioned how Powder Keg has a really good air compressed launch, but it's not my favorite. This thing, that air compressed launch is demonic as all get out. 0 to 78 in 1.8 seconds or however fast you go. It is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, gut punches I've ever experienced on a coaster. It's one of the only coasters I've actually felt nervous on my first ride in. It's like a massive sonic boom that goes off every time it launches. You can hear it from anywhere in the park. Max Force, I think, was actually pretty reliable. I don't think I saw it go down once when I was there.
Not in its first few seasons, but now apparently they've worked it out.
I rode it in July of 2021. I didn't see it go down once at all. Besides the amazing launch, the Heartline roll is one of the best inversions out there, like easily top 3 for me. I think when I first rode it, I did say it was my favorite, but then I experienced 2 others that I would say are better. If you're wanting a short launch coaster that does more besides the initial launch, go ride Max Force. It's worth your time.
My number 32 is my favorite coaster at my home park, Mr. Freeze Reverse Blast. Let's just say I wasn't the biggest fan of this growing up. I was fine with it. It was like number 3 in the park pretty much the entire time. But now, the past few seasons, it's never been disappointing. So that's why it's my favorite coaster in the park. Good launch at the beginning, not one of the better ones, but it's still pretty decent. The inverted top hat is one of my favorite inversions of all time because this thing actually has airtime. Sometimes it has hang time, sometimes it has ejector airtime, sometimes it has floater airtime. There is so many different forces in it, and it's ridiculous. The overbank going out is fine. Going up to the spike, you get boosted up, and then the valley coming down is a good gray out moment. Most of the valleys are gray out moments because it's so intense. The overbank coming back into the station is ridiculous. And then you got the inverted top hat, one of the greatest inversions of all time.
Number 31 is a ride that spited Ryan, unfortunately. Twisted Timbers at King's Dominion. This RMC hybrid I thought was not as good as Steel Vengeance when I got my first ride on it in August of 2021. But after my second ride in the back row of the green train, it was better for me. So much ejector airtime on every single hill, and it was really good. Barrel roll down drop's a fun inversion, and I can see why people say it's the best coaster at King's Dominion, although I personally wouldn't go that far. But I would say underrated when it comes to RMCs.
My number 31 is Goliath at Six Flags Over Georgia, my third favorite B&M hypercoaster. A lot of people's favorites, but not mine. I haven't been on it since January 2nd, 2021. Rode it twice, once in the front, once in the back. The back row ride was in night, and that was probably my favorite. Very good airtime. Some of the strongest airtime of any B&M hyper. Downward helix was pretty intense. I would say it's more intense than Nitro's helix. Then the ending hills are flowjector the entire time going in. And then that last little dip before the brakes is a really nice pop of ejector. Other than that, Goliath is a very smooth and very enjoyable coaster.
Number 30 is Storm Chaser at Kentucky Kingdom. This was by far my lowest ranked RMC prior to this year, as I only got one ride in 2017. My mom wanted the ride ops to staple me, so I didn't go flying out of the train, which I'm like, whatever. And it wasn't great because I didn't get any airtime. This year, however, I got 10 rides on it, no stapling, a lot of the strongest airtime I've ever experienced. And I don't know if this was a fluke or not, but on the last ride of the night, which I was not on, but Ryan apparently was, my brother did a ride forces and it said negative 2.9 Gs on the trick track double up. This is most likely a miscalculation, but if it was legit, that's actually kind of ridiculous because I've never heard of a coaster having stronger airtime than that before. Not even Magnum's finale in the Magic Seat.
No.
Barrel roll down drop is really good. A crazy ejector hill before the zero drill at the end. Also a wacky helix with a crazy head chopper that a lot of people don't talk about at the end. It's a really solid ride, and I can see why one would say it's an upper tier RMC.
My number 30 is Mako at SeaWorld Orlando. I previously thought this was one of the best B&M hypers ever. Still is, but I don't think it's anywhere close to my favorite anymore. It was very close at one point, but this year changed that. I got some more rides on it this year, 6 total. Every single hill was good. I still don't really like the second half that much. Besides that overbank that pops you a little bit, it's just void of pretty much any forces. I don't really have any problem with the first half. The first half is my type of ride with a bunch of airtime. Probably the smoothest coaster I've ever been on. The second half is what brings it down for me, but it's still in my top 30.
Storm Chaser, which was my number 30, did not have a ton of variety in its layout, and that's why I didn't rank it higher. My number 29 is an RMC with a lot of variety. Wildcat's Revenge at Hershey Park. Some may call this the best ride at Hershey Park, and I can totally understand that, but for me, I have it ranked second. It's got a ton of unique elements with the world's largest step-up underflip, multiple great zero-G rolls at the end, an awesome zero-G stall, and even some weird lateral moments, which you don't usually find on an RMC. Wildcat's Revenge is just a quality coaster that you really can't go wrong with, although I probably wouldn't recommend riding in the morning because I've heard it can run slow in the morning, but I never got morning rides on it. I've only gotten afternoon and night rides on it, so I wouldn't know how it is in the morning, but still, it's a very solid RMC, and I thought about putting it a spot higher, but the sense of speed on the coaster I have next on my list is what puts it over the top for me.
My number 29 is a defunct ride. Top Thrill Dragster at Cedar Point. This is my brother's favorite coaster, so it pains me to talk about it because it was just so good. I only got to ever ride it twice, which was disappointing. I rode it in row 2 and I rode it in row 5. One of the best elements of all time with that launch. Such power behind it. The first time I rode it, I think I grayed out or blacked out. There was some airtime over the top hat. Wasn't as strong as I would have liked it to be, but it's all due to that launch, and the spiral drop was pretty fun. Some of the most thrilling 17 seconds of my life, pretty much.
Number 28 is a coaster that I bet a lot of people have ranked ranked way higher. Air Force One at Fun Spot Atlanta. I said this last year when I was talking about it. This coaster ranks lower because of my preferences. It does have a great sense of speed though, and that's why I do rank it above Wildcat's Revenge. In 2023, I only got 2 rides on it because traffic put me at Fun Spot Atlanta at 8 o'clock when I should have been there a couple hours early, and the park closed at 10, so I didn't have any time. Thankfully, this year I got 13 more rides on it, and one thing I did realize is that the quad down, unfortunately, is one of my least favorite elements on any RMC. I know that's probably a hot take, but it's just too much for me, especially on my later rides. It does have a lot of good elements that put it as high as it does, though. The zero-G stall, despite being the longest one in the world, isn't quite my favorite. The Outer Bank is still the best Outer Bank of any RMC. The arcade rolls, elite. The other zero-G roll near the arcade rolls, also really good. Overall, it's just a relentless RMC, and I can somewhat see why people have it as their favorite, but the quad down, it's just too much for me, and I can't rank it as high because of that.
My number 28 is Twisted Cyclone at Six Flags Over Georgia. I think it's the smallest RMC I've been on, but it packs a punch. Some of the strongest airtime of any RMC I think I've been on. Tries to launch you across the road that it's right next to. The inverting Cobra roll is, all Cobra rolls invert. What is that element called again?
The non-inverting, or the reverse Cobra roll.
Reverse,
I almost said non-inverting. I'm like,
okay.
wait, that's not right.
No, that is a very unique element and got some good whip to that. Coming out of it was pretty fun. All the airtime moments are great. The wave turn is one of my favorite wave turns I've been on. It seems short, which is the general consensus, but I think it's just the right amount of length.
Number 27 is Big Bear Mountain at Dollywood. This right here is how you do a family coaster. It's not too intense, not too mild, not too tall, not too fast. It meets all the criteria. It doesn't have any elements I feel like little kids would be terrified of. It's just good fun. Great on-ride soundtrack as well, which that's the reason why I haven't ranked this high. It's got a phenomenal on-ride soundtrack. Great sense of speed, good launches, very smooth, although I don't think it's quite as smooth as a certain other coaster, but the coaster I'm referring to is going to be in part 2. Big Bear, I would say sleeper hit, and as my brother says, Big Bear Mountain kicks Big Bear butt.
My number 27 is Ghost Rider at Knott's Berry Farm. Ghost Rider was phenomenal. The first half was a little bit mediocre, still had some good forces, had some decent floater and stuff to it. The second half is where it really shines. All the airtime moments in the second half were ejector when I rode it. It had very strong laterals in the second half, and that helix at the end was almost as good as Legends. It's due to that airtime in that second half that it ranks so high for me.
My number 26, you guys have been eyeing it this whole time. You're like, when he's gonna talk about this, it's finally time. Revenge of the Mummy at Universal Studios Florida. This is my highest ranked new credit for the year, but I will say I was actually pretty disappointed with it after my first ride. I thought Rip Ride Rocket was significantly better, but the more I rode it, the more I realized just how cool this ride is between the theming, which I will say I did not have the best of luck with all the fire effects. I had some of them going, but not all of them were working for me, unfortunately. I know some of the fire in the fake ending scene wasn't going, like all the torches on the wall, those were not going. And also in the room where Imhotep appears on the big screen, I guess the treasure room, if you will, some of the fire effects right beneath Imhotep were not going either, but that didn't really take away from the ride too much because it was still really good. At least the fire on the ceiling of the fake ending was going. That's all I was concerned about. It's got 3 launches, although it really only feels like it has 1 because 2 of them are essentially pushes, but the incline launch is a lot of fun. The airtime after it wasn't quite as good as I thought it would be, but then again, I heard it was better before they refurbished it, which that's why I was spited out of this in 2022. I figured out why I missed out on Revenge of the Mummy in 2022. I did the production tour for the ride, which I highly recommend for anyone wanting to get a cool view of the ride, which huge shout out to Dino for being an amazing tour guide and allowing me to get some shots of Revenge of the Mummy from under the ride. It was during this production tour where I found out that Revenge of the Mummy was closed in 2022 because they were switching the operating system from a 1993 Windows operating system to 2003. They were using an early 90s Windows system on Revenge of the Mummy. That's just weird. Really, it was the production tour that elevated it almost into my top 25 because it gave me a whole new appreciation for just how brilliant this ride is. And I have my little Medjai necklace I've been wearing right here, which, like I said, huge thanks to Dana for giving this to me.
My number 26 is Lightning Run at Kentucky Kingdom. It wasn't running as good this year, but I still had a lot of fun on it. Had some great airtime. The only gripe I have is the restraints come down too hard. But they don't come down hard enough for me not to get airtime, which is the common complaint about that ride. Very strong ejector, very good laterals, very smooth, has a very cool sound to it, and it's weird to have RMC restraints on a chance ride. Hopefully with Hot Wheels Twin Mill Racers, they have fixed the restraint system so that it clicks and then stops.
So that wraps up part 1 of our top 50 coasters. You should expect the second half of this, which will be our top 25, to release the day after this. So stay tuned for that. We'll see you later.